UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Franchise Fatigue, the little podcast on the United Federation of Podcast Network, where two geek hosts take a look at all the movies in a franchise of films, all the sequels, all the remakes, and we discuss them, and we analyze them, and we keep looking at them until they're dead, and then we bring them back from the dead for a little bit more. And joining me, as always, is my ever-constant nemesis cop, Zach Moore.
You know, Brandon, sometimes dead is better when it comes to franchises, and I'm looking forward to talking about this one with you.
Uh-oh, that's an omen, if I ever heard one. We did not get Denise Crosby back, but we got something even better, though, I'll say. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about who our guest is. We got a special guest coming back for a second round with the corpses, John Mills.
I can't get enough of these potatoes. That's really... I love mashed potatoes, and I just cannot, ever since you brought me back, I just can't stop eating them. It's the best thing. Yeah.
Is this like, do you think that this is Mary Lambert's homage to Spielberg?
Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
I hope not. I really hope not.
Excellent, right on. Well, tonight we are talking about Pet Sematary 2, and starring Clancy Brown, starring Edward Furlong of Terminator 2 fame. And it's going to be a blast, I'm sure. There's lots of wonderful things to talk about. Not to mention, what's his name from ER?
Anthony Edwards.
Oh, Anthony Edwards, yes.
Yeah, because I couldn't actually remember his name, but I knew his face.
George Clooney is in Pet Sematary too? Well, I mean, he was in Batman and Robin, so you never know.
Excellent, right on. But before we discuss the film, Zach, I am guessing that you have got a whole bunch of trivia that you've dug up, and I'm sorry, that's the only joke that I could come up with this one, because it's the only thing that works. You dug this trivia up, I'm sure.
I did. Insert Pet Sematary joke here, and now we move on to the trivia. So, Pet Sematary, the first movie, had a budget of $11.5 million, and it made, domestically, $57.5 million. So, a very successful film for Paramount. So, it guess it should come as no surprise. They made a sequel. Pet Sematary 2, let's just get this out now. It made a budget of $8 million, and it grossed $17 million. So, it doubled its budget, which pretty much means it broke even, right? When you would usually, the cost of a film, when you double the budget to understand how much they need to make back to break even because of marketing. So needless to say, we didn't get a Pet Sematary 3 based off the box office and maybe some other things. But this film is set in real time 3 years after the original film, the Creeds and all that stuff. 1989 plus 3, 1992. Here we are. And director Mary Lambert said that her original concept for the film would have involved Ellie Creed as the main character because she was the only survivor from the first film. So that makes sense to me. Yeah. But Paramount was not confident in making the film's lead a teenage girl. Because, they'd never seen Halloween or, any of these other slasher franchises, Nightmare on Elm Street. That can never work, right?
Girls can't be in movies.
Right. So the story was written with completely new characters and a male protagonist. And Edward Furlong was cast in the lead because he was hot off, as we said, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which had come out in 1991. Now, with this new concept in mind, Mary Lambert did have this to say. She said, quote, "I really wanted to get into the idea of what goes on in a teenage boy's head on why they do stupid things, because that's the kind of stupid thing a teenage boy would do. Louis Creed buries his son because of an intense desire, a feeling of guilt that it's his fault and that the boy died. But Edward Furlong's character buries Clancy Brown in the Pet Sematary, because he's a teenage boy and he's stupid. For teenage boys, the blood is not going to their brain, it's going somewhere else." So that's her take on...
what does she mean by that?
Character motivations. We all know. We've all been there. Now, I find this very interesting. There's a January 1991 draft of this screenplay that mentions David S. Goyer of the Dark Knight trilogy fame and Blade 3 Trinity, so take that as you will. But he's not credited in the final film, but there is a draft with his name on it somewhere. So now our Edward Furlong is our main child character. Our main... Well, Clancy Brown's kind of the main adult character, but our main hero character, played by Anthony Edwards, he actually met his wife on the set of this film. And here's what he had to say about it, quote, "Oh my God, a movie I don't think I've ever even seen. And yet it's probably the most important movie I've ever worked on because it's the movie I met my wife on. What's funny, though, is that she doesn't usually do makeup on movies. She's more of a fashion makeup artist. So the coincidence that we would end up in the same place on that movie, me who can't even watch horror movies, and she who doesn't even really work on films, and yet we ended up meeting there. So good for them, right? I mean, like, at least something good came out of this. So,
yeah, that's a positive.
What? Oh, my goodness.
And also, Jason McGuire, who played Drew, he was very shy and timid to be starring in a movie because he had only, to this point, he'd only done plays, like in elementary school, and he had never had any other acting experience. But when he met Edward Furlong, they became fast friends, and they became best friends for their work on this film. So that's another positive for you. And
Okay.
Speaking of more Stephen King connections, right? Even though Stephen King had nothing to do with this movie, other than it being a sequel to his original work, the monster arm prop they use in the first scene to grab Edward Furlong's mom, that's the same arm that they used in It, in the TV movie It, the skeleton in the pond. So they're reusing props from a TV movie for this movie, which seems appropriate. Also, I found this very interesting. In the very first scene we meet Anthony Edwards' character, they're euthanizing a dog, and the dog was actually aged up with white makeup on his fur, so he looked like an older dog. So I thought that was an interesting point there, because it's like you think they just get an older dog, but I guess for Hollywood, the dogs need to be trained and all that kind of stuff, and they need to train to stay perfectly still. So, ageism even in the dog world when it comes to Hollywood, I guess.
And you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
There you go. There you have it. So there are little bits of continuity from the first film that are sprinkled into this one. Mainly the most noticeable one, outside of dialogue, is when the bullies steal the cat from Edward Furlong. They're in a bike chase, and they all ride by the Creed house. We see the name on the mailbox and all that stuff. It's very obvious. It's not like an Easter egg. It's like right there so for you to see. So, and then finally, the Ramones, again, return to do a end credit song. So there you go. Barry Lambert's music video connections coming in big for the Ramones.
Awesome. That was very good trivia. I love it. I do not have anything to add to that because there was no behind-the-scenes anything on this movie. There was no commentary, no nothing.
I can't believe that. That's
So
very bare-bones DVD.
Did Denise Crosby think she was too big for Pet Sematary as well? Is that why she left the franchise? I wonder. So
possibly. Very, very possibly. So, excellent. So... I'll talk about this, a little bit of my history with this film again first, and then I'll get to you guys here. So my sister and I watched this movie so darn many times when I was growing up. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen this movie. And this is like one of the go-to horror movies that we watched. And this is where I discovered Clancy Brown, and I fell in love with Clancy Brown. I love Clancy Brown. We don't see Clancy Brown enough. And this is where my love of Clancy Brown started. So this is a very, very important movie in my childhood, in little Brandon's childhood, for developing his film preferences, and probably part of the reason why I'm so forgiving on movie sequels. John, have you seen this movie before?
Nope. Watched it just for this thought experiment right here.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate that you did. I think it's a lot of fun. And I think what sold it to you was when I told you that Clancy Brown was in it.
Yes, I agree with you. Clancy Brown, of course, my first encounter with him was Highlander many years ago, and I've been in love with him since. If I see his name on something, I'm instantly more intrigued, and I love him so much as an actor. I just think he's tremendously talented, and that is how you hooked me into this. That is true. Yeah.
So, Zach, this is your first experience with this movie as well, isn't it?
Yes, and like John, I'm a big Clancy Brown fan. And like you, Brandon, I'm a big Clancy Brown fan. I know him best from Superman the Animated Series, where he voiced Lex Luthor. Iconically voiced Lex Luthor in several animated shows and animated movies. Of course, I know him from Highlander as well, and I think he's a really underappreciated, underused actor. And he is a lot of fun to watch in this movie. I mean, if nothing else, he is a one redeeming factor in this film. But yeah, this is I'll give it this. I think for a sequel to Pet Sematary, there were some interesting ideas they picked up on. Now if you're just gonna throw out doing a real sequel with like the characters and stuff like that, then sure. Having like teenagers and like kind of make sentimental decisions about pets. They don't have all the information that they had in the first movie, and then just make kind of stupid decision after stupid decision. We talk about the first movie. Like I can understand why these guys made this decision, especially the husband, because he was like, oh my daughter's cat, my son, my wife, But for this one, it's like it's teenagers, and they're just making mistakes as you do with that age. So I kind of see that, and I like how it kind of tied in the whole like pets thing more, because I feel like that for having the Pet Sematary, the first film was like you have the cat, that's kind of it. They don't really go much more with that, but like the dog, like the kid having an attachment to his dog. Like I'm a dog lover, I'm an animal lover. I love animals, and of course it's really sad when you have to put a pet down, but. So you get why they would want to resurrect the kid would want to resurrect his dog. So I don't know. They play more with that concept, and I felt like okay, like if things were going to continue in this town after the first movie, I can see these events taking place. So it wasn't an awful terrible concept. I think the execution, there's a lot to be desired, but I at least give it credit there. I felt like they went some new places with the Pet Sematary itself. So.
John, what are your initial impressions of the film?
I agree that Clancy Brown is the high point. I think that after a certain point, you can see that Clancy Brown is just having fun. And Clancy Brown having fun is something I'll watch, film reel after film reel of. But it essentially comes across, in all honesty, like two different movie concepts slammed together. And they don't mesh. And it is something where if they had cut the whole Edward Furlong thing and just done the Clancy Brown Manson family thing, then I would have actually probably been more on board with it, because that was the more interesting thread to follow. Mm-hmm. There was Anthony Edwards' character was a dud, in all honesty. It was just... I didn't even understand why he was there except to model early 90s fashions, which, quite frankly...
were terrible.
Oh, man, I did not like revisiting those.
Yes.
But I see this as two different concepts mashed together, and the bully is too psychotic. Mm-hmm. And Clancy Brown, even after a certain point... when he shoots the dog, it's like that's really awful and terrible and all of that sort of stuff. But like, I would have rather just seen the movie with that family and expand that out and spend more time with that. I think that one of the bigger hurdles is that Edward Furlong was discovered for Terminator 2, and I don't think that he was ready for something that required a little bit more nuance than helpless child with robot protector sort of thing. I think this was a little bit too early in his development as an actor to tackle.
Yeah, John, that's a great point about Edward Furlong in Terminator 2, because James Cameron pulls like the best performances out of actors. I mean, even Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? If you really want to look at his best performance, arguably Terminator 2, right? And then you look at Terminator 3 and how he does as the Terminator, and it's a whole other conversation. So, I definitely think Edward Furlong, he was a hot name, I guess, but he was not the reason Terminator 2 was so successful, and I think that was an ill-informed decision if they were going to build this movie around his quote-unquote star power. So,
Yeah. Some of the points that you guys have made is really interesting because... I can't really divorce myself from these two movies being a sequel to the first one and, like being a sequel to each other, because I watched them in pairs my entire youth. So